Welcome to XYPN Radio, where your host Alan Moore brings you into a community of fee-only financial planners who want to profitably and successfully serve Gen X and Gen Y clients. If you're ready to get the knowledge you need from leaders in your field, learn from forward-thinking advisors, and take action on your own goals, XYPN Radio is the show for you. Here's your host.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of XYPN Radio. I'm Maddie Roach, your host for today's podcast. Alan Moore is enjoying his sabbatical. I'm excited to have XYPN member Leighann Miko, owner of Equalis Financial, a fee-only firm in Los Angeles, California, on the show today. Leighann began her career in this industry, but her money scripts that led her into this career were formed much earlier than that. Leighann grew up poor, and she was the first member of her family to graduate from high school. As Leighann discusses, she has a deep understanding and identity with the trauma and stress that finances can have on someone at an early age. And it's one of the many things that make her so relatable to her clients. After putting herself through college, she worked as an assistant to a CFP and even had an experience as a failed succession plan. 3 years ago, Leighann finally opened up her own firm that affords her the liberty to work with who she wants and how she wants. Today, she serves over 35 individuals on an ongoing basis, serving folks in the communities that she's part of, creatives and the LGBTQ individuals. Leighann is particularly transparent during her interview, talking with us on how she has been able to pay off her credit card debt that she found herself in, and how George Kinder's life planning course has changed the way she looks at money and how she serves her clients. Leighann credits some of the meaningful relationships she's formed over these years for why she's able to be so authentic and transparent. We discuss where the industry is heading and how each of us can help move it in the right direction. If you're interested in building a practice that revolves around relatability and authenticity, then you won't want to miss today's episode.
XY Planning Network's annual benchmarking survey is out. Are you curious about the average number of clients XYPN members get in their first year, or how successful niches really are? To answer these burning questions and more, we've again enlisted a professional research firm to complete our annual benchmarking study. Get your copy hot off the press and discover vital statistics such as the median advisor revenue by years in practice and sources of firm growth, from referrals to blogging, social media, and more. Head over to xyplanningnetwork.com/study to purchase your copy today.
You can find any of the resources we mentioned during the episode at xyplanningnetwork.com/238. Also, be sure to go to xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP to join our private group just for XYPN radio listeners. It's a community of advisors we've all been waiting for, and it's there to provide you support when we need it the most. Best of all, it's free. I encourage you to check it out. Again, that's xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP. Without further ado, here's my interview with Leighann Miko. Hey, Leighann, welcome to XYPN Radio.
Thanks for having me, Maddie.
I've been really looking forward to this conversation. I think it's going to be so helpful to our listeners to hear your journey into this industry and through your years of building your firm. So let's get right to it. Leighann, paint the picture for what your firm is today.
Well, my firm, funny enough, is kind of in the middle of a transition now that we're hitting the end of year 3. But, the firm is Equalis Financial. We're located in Los Angeles, though we do have clients in many different states, thanks to technology and whatnot. It's been able, to afforded me the ability to work with people anywhere. And that was kind of my objective. I wanted to work with folks regardless of location, especially if they were seeking someone who was LGBTQ friendly. So right now, the firm is January 2nd will mark the end of our 3rd year. In that time, we've built to about 36 clients ongoing at this point. And so hoping to build that a little bit further, but that's where it stands as of now. And there's an interesting breakdown of those 36 clients. 21 of them are strictly financial planning, retainer-based only. So clients who either didn't have assets or chose to manage them on their own. And then about 15 of them, I'd say, I do both financial planning and I manage their investments as well.
Interesting. I love that breakdown. And you're really right on track with what we've seen with the benchmarking survey results. Congratulations on hitting 3 years and servicing 36 ongoing clients. That's impressive and sounds like you've been doing a lot of work. Do you recall what client numbers you were at after first year or second year?
Yeah, it was a bit different. The first year, I think like most people was a bit rough. So I was able to bring on, by the end of the first year, I had 8 retainer clients and then 9 clients who I did both financial planning and investment management for. So there was a total of 17. The thing to note about that, though, is in the first year, I don't know about other people, but for me, it was more or less, can you fog a mirror? Yes, then please be a client. So I wouldn't, I'd probably say 50% of those 17 were really far from ideal for a variety of different reasons, but I am forever grateful for them for helping me to keep money in my bank account.
Absolutely. And were those clients that you continue to serve today, or have you had those conversations that the firm has changed and thus can no longer work with them, or are they still working with you?
That's actually something I should look into the details of. I would say probably half of those have gone separate ways, and that was either by my doing or their doing. Either it just wasn't a good fit, or as I continued to build the business, reinvent the service model, the level of services I was providing, it just didn't make sense. And so there's a few that are hanging on there that I really need to have a conversation with, but I've been putting it off because I'm not good at those conversations. So I'm just kind of waiting until I feel comfortable enough to put my big girl pants on and have that conversation.
Absolutely. The conversation about fees being raised and the conversation about you may not be an ideal client anymore, I think are the two most common, most difficult conversations I hear advisors talk about. But Leighann, let's go back before you had your firm. Give us a walkthrough of what your professional career looked like before you became a businesswoman.
Yeah, it's been quite the journey. I will say that I've been quite fortunate in that this has been my only career.
Wow.
I've been talking to a lot of folks in recent months who were career changers. And so listening kind of their transition is really fascinating. And I'm almost envious, but not. It's like, I wish I had some sort of cool story about how I transitioned from doing music journalism to financial planning and how that somehow managed to work out. But that just wasn't the case. Being a financial advisor also wasn't something that I knew early on. As a kid, I always wanted to be a school teacher, to the point where after school, I would legit dig through the dumpsters for the unused school papers so I could use them in the classroom that I had created in my bedroom to pass out to all of my stuffed animals and whatever thing I could line up as my quote unquote student. And so it was slightly embarrassing. It was pretty much on brand for who I was, though. But that's just not how life turns out, though I did think that up until college. And it was really born in this idea that I really enjoy sharing information and knowledge, which coincidentally is what led me to financial planning. It's just another form of sharing information and knowledge. But before I got to the point where I realized it was financial planning, there was a few harsh realities that I had to deal with. And one of those was the fact that I don't have the temperament to deal with children. And it took me my first year of college and going through all the child development classes and having some pretty frank conversations with friends that kind of opened my eyes and said, hey, this might not be the path for you for a couple of reasons. Maybe you should reconsider. But more importantly is that I didn't trust that I would earn enough as a teacher to feel comfortable. And that was kind of also a harsh awakening. I was putting myself through college. I was the only person in my family even to graduate from high school. So it was very much on my own and in every sense of the word, and so I grew up in a house where money was a pretty volatile and hostile topic, mostly because there wasn't any of it. So that creates some trauma and tension within the house. And quite honestly, like if had we not had food stamps and government assistance, like I have no idea what we would have eaten half the time. And so I'm incredibly, thankful for those resources. As I grew up and life shifted and changed, my mom, turns out, ended up being a 32-year-old single mother raising a 9, 11, and 13-year-old on her own in Los Angeles. And so that was a pretty rough couple of years growing up and kind of the money situation and what was happening there. And she dropped out of high school in 10th grade. So the reality was that she was likely not going to be able to get any sort of high-paying job that was going to afford us much of anything. And so, over the years, there was multiple evictions pretty much everywhere we lived. We got kicked out of. I don't think we ever held on to a car for more than a year or two after, before it was repossessed for not being able to make the payments, when we did have a car. And so a lot of my high school days were kind of sitting on the bus on the way home, crossing my fingers, hoping that when I got home, the power was still on, because it was a pretty common thing to come home and go, oh, crap, I guess I have to call the Department of Water and Power and beg them to turn the power on, which was not the best way for me to spend my afternoons as a high schooler. But, I also recognized that my mom was doing the best she could. But it definitely created a huge money complex for me. Right. But on the other side of that, it also created this drive for success, because I knew that I did not want to repeat that cycle. I wanted more stability and safety in my life and more of a cushion, I suppose. Mm-hmm. And so if I think back, the idea of being a teacher is, yes, a steady paycheck. And the one thing, we do a horrible job of taking care of our teachers. We pay them terribly. And, they are doing the job of a miracle worker. But I knew that. I knew it was a steady paycheck, but it was not a great paycheck. So, recognizing how important that reassurance and stability was made me realize that I could use my experience to help guide clients on their own financial journey. So it was kind of tying everything together in terms of my experience, what I had gone through. I can empathize with clients' fears and insecurities about money, and I can identify with it to help them discover and shape their relationship with money, which is how I naturally gravitated towards the LGBTQ plus community and creatives, which are two of the more financially insecure demographics, of course, for very different reasons. But that is just kind of what I naturally gravitated towards, because there's a strong connection there with the insecurities around money. And so that's basically how that journey went, of recognizing school teacher, no, something else, higher paying, yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So when you were in college, was that something that you pursued there, or was that kind of a post-college decision that kind of ultimately brings together everything that you were looking for in terms of being able to serve your community members?
It was, again, I keep saying natural, which I have to mention I'm incredibly grateful for, because I know that was very... Not a lot of people find that natural gravitation towards something and spend their lives basically yearning for something that has meaning. And so I'm very grateful for that. But it came pretty easily to me. I kind of looked back and I said, well, what are the other things that I could do? And I was the dork in high school who took accounting and business as electives, right? And so I was like, okay, I really enjoyed those classes. I probably put the most effort into them out of any of my classes. At that point, I was putting myself through college. So, I had a job. I was paying all of my own bills. I was creating my own budgets. I was like, I can do these things and I can help other people do the same. And so I was like, you know what? I want to do something with money. I'm helping people with their money. And I didn't know what it was. I'd never heard of a financial advisor. I didn't know any of this stuff was, growing up poor. What do you need to know that for? So I switched my major the next couple of weeks. I switched it to business, and I was like, I assume somehow through this process I'll figure it out. But I know it's business will lead me there. So I did that. Started taking all of the accounting, economics classes and what have you. And then funny enough, December 2006, I was browsing the Craigslist classifieds for. It was less creepy then, but I was looking for just a part-time job while I was finishing my degree. And coincidentally, I was in the accounting business section, and there was the headline that said part-time assistant for CFP.
Wow.
Yeah. I'd never heard the term before. I had no idea what it was. So naturally I was like, click, let me discover this and see what's going on here. And so I was fortunate enough to land an interview with her. And she was willing to take a chance, and she hired me. Wow. And that's how the journey started. I started as her assistant, working, 20 hours a week while I was finishing my undergraduate degree.
Amazing. Sometimes it takes another woman in this industry to be able to tap in another one into the industry. And that's how I got into it. It sounds like that's how you got into it. And what a great story. So how long between working for her as an admin did it take before you opened up Equalis Financial?
So I worked for three, including her firm, I worked for three firms over basically a 9-year period, bouncing around. Most of them, they were as close to fee only as possible. There were some quirks in there and kinks. I did end up going to a franchise office of Ameriprise, which I always swore I wouldn't do. But the man who ran that firm to this day is one of the greatest humans I've ever met in my life.
Wow.
And when I was interviewing with him, which I did, for a friend because they asked me to, I said, okay, I'll give it a shot. He won me over. He was just such a phenomenal human who was willing to go the extra mile to help anyone and everyone. And so that outweighed all the negative that I had grown to feel and think towards, the broker-dealer type world, wirehouses, all of that. Ended up being an incredible experience. That's where I was really able to actually hone my financial planning skills, which is not necessarily what you think, but we were doing comprehensive plans for, dozens and dozens of clients, every year. At the end of the day with that firm though, it wasn't a good fit with some of the other folks who worked there. And I consider myself a pretty self-aware person. And I just came, I knew that I'm a horrible employee. Flat out, I'm a terrible employee. And so that doesn't bode well when you are working under people who have a say in what you do. And so I just kind of had a moment where I was like, you know what, this has been really amazing. I learned what I needed to learn there, but it's time for me to move on to something else a little bit different. And so that basically started the next leg of the journey, so to speak. And a somewhat unplanned, it was definitely, but it turned out to work out really well because, upon my leaving that firm, I spent the next couple of months studying for my CFP exam. And then I was like, you know what, I'm going to take a couple months, study for the exam, get through that, and then figure out what my next step is. And that's basically exactly what I did.
Wow. And then you became a firm owner.
More or less, not so direct.
Why do you say that?
Well, so there was a thing that happened between actually starting the firm, there. I had a mentor who I had met through the woman who gave me my first job. It was one of her really good friends who happened to be a CFP as well. She had a small firm in LA and she was looking to retire. And so she and I started discussing the potential for me to buy her firm and take over essentially over, the next year. And we started the process and we were going through things. I was meeting with clients and, spent a year or so working through everything, getting to know all the clients. And unfortunately, nothing ever materialized. Neither one of us, I think, knew exactly what we were doing. And I think that there were a lot of mistakes made probably on both sides. I'm certainly not innocent in the way things went. I don't think we were on the same page. I think there were not enough discussions ahead of time. There was nothing ever in writing. Expectations never set. And so it blew up literally on a Friday morning in October of 2016. It just completely imploded.
Wow.
And so I had spent the better part of 12 months making very little to no money, thinking I'm making this investment in this firm, and it was really great. The firm, it catered to the LGBTQ community. It was a smaller, client base. Everything seemed to line up on paper. It was the perfect matching, perfect meeting of minds, match up everything. And so what I ended up with was a big pile of nothing in my hands on a Friday morning. And at that point, probably close to $30,000 in debt because of the whole process that had happened, this idea that I was, investing my time and energy into this buyout that was going to happen. And it didn't. And so that basically is what led to, me starting the firm. Was I had a few conversations over that weekend, which was quite the manic weekend. It was either I was laughing hysterically or I was crying, uncontrollably, like what just happened? I don't know what I'm doing now. But, if I look back on it now, it was certainly a blessing in disguise. And it's one of those instances. And, the more I tell this story to people, the more I'm hearing, oh, that happened to me too. Or, oh my God, I know this happened to so-and-so. And it's happening more and more frequently, which is pretty awful. But for me, at least, I'm able to look back on it now and say, you know what, everything worked out the way it needed to. And I'm quite grateful that it didn't, it didn't end up coming to fruition.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have any recommendations for the listeners who may find themselves in a position similar to yours? Any takeaways from that you could recommend?
Get everything in writing.
Okay.
That's the big one. I think setting clear expectations from the get-go and having very open and honest and direct communication is the only way you're going to come through it. It's kind of like dating. Like, you're getting to know not only the business owner, but the clients.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think for me a little bit, I also got a little caught up in the idea of, like, at the end of this rainbow, there was this pot of gold kind of thing. Both, the reason I didn't start a firm was because I feared starting from nothing. I was in my early 30s. I was a woman. I was like, who's going to work with me? How could I ever build a business? That was, essentially the way I was thinking. And so I was like, if I can just have, this foundation to help me get off the ground, I would be more comfortable. But I think really getting to know the philosophy and the idea, that the business owner has, kind of how they've run their business, how they think, and making sure those line up. Because if they don't, it's going to be, you may have a really hard time retaining those clients. Because if they're used to a certain philosophy, a certain way of doing things, and all of a sudden you swoop in and you are drastically going to change things, it's probably not going to bode well for longevity. And you may end up losing quite a few clients.
Yeah, great advice. And really, I mean, what a test of your confidence that then you went out and did that thing you didn't think you could do, and 3 years later you're here to tell us about it. And just hearing your story, it sounds like every inflection point you had has really brought you to where you are today and allowed you to create the firm of your dreams. So let's fast forward to today and talk to us about Equalis Financial and what went into kind of your decision to frame it and market it the way it is. How did you decide kind of the nuts and bolts of who you would serve, how you would serve them, and talk us through kind of that first year?
Yeah, the first year was survival mode. Yep. It was literally survival mode. It was a little terrifying. There was a lot of, oh my God, what did you do? Oh my God, what have you gotten yourself into? Why did you do this? Kind of moments. It was tricky because it also brought me back to that place as a kid of like, there is no stability in this right now. There's no safety. I don't have a safety net. I didn't have a partner, wasn't married. I didn't have a second source of income. The best I could do was in my early 30s, I moved back into my mother's spare room to save money on rent so I could launch the business, and so that first year was very hectic, very stressful. As I, started signing clients, I became a little bit, the confidence started to build and it started to grow. And I was like, okay, something is in the water here. It's working. I just got to be patient and what have you, and the type of clients I was going for, aside from, fogging a mirror and having, a pulse, I wanted to try and focus on people who were like me. I think that's where we naturally gravitate towards, and where's, commonalities. And so the LGBTQ community, I was focusing on working with women as well as younger professionals, people, a lot of demographics that have typically been underserved and ignored by most folks, because I identified with all of them. I am all of them, and now it worked out pretty well. I'd say that I was not good at sticking to it. I put the messaging out there and I said the things, but basically if people called me and they weren't the thing, I still said, sure, why not? Let's sign on the dotted line and get this party started.
Absolutely. And when did you know that you're going to make it? When did some of that, I mean, you talked about your confidence growing, but when did it, when you're looking at your P&L, did it finally become clear that this is going to be a viable pursuit of yours?
It probably took about 18 months before I was remotely comfortable, where I said to myself, okay, this can work. There's potential here. When I mentioned earlier that, I started the business with debt already, that first year, that debt grew because I was not bringing in enough money to pay my bills. And, unfortunately, like I do live in a very expensive place. I do have student loans myself and bills and what have you. And so, that debt grew. And so, that was always a big concern. It was, the business is doing great. It's paying my basic bills, but I've got this debt now that I've also got to pay off. And so that was an added layer of stress and somewhat panic of, okay, I can pay the bills, but now I've got to figure out how to pay back, this money that I've essentially borrowed to exist and do this thing. And so, between January 2015 to January 2018, that debt grew to be about $50,000. And so from January 2018 until this month, I've been paying that off. And so basically this month I will make that the final payment and I will start 2020 with no debt.
Wow. Congratulations.
Thank you. It is a statement I've been dying to say for years.
Oh, I bet. What a celebratory time.
Yeah. So, that was, aside from the business doing well, I had to consider the fact that I still had to figure out how to pay that back. And so whenever I was looking at numbers and saying, okay, this is going to work, it was always with the caveat that like, oh yeah, but you still have all of this to pay back. It probably, wasn't until the end of 2018 where I kind of had that moment where I said, I was looking at the numbers for 2019. I was looking at the debt and the payments, and I was like, okay, this is real. I think I've got this. I'm pretty close to being comfortable, and now it's getting to the point where it's more or less, how can I grow this thing to create more of the life that I want now that the foundation, the basics are covered.
Absolutely. And over those years, did you have any fee increases for your services that you were providing to clients? Did you realize, like many do, holy cow, I've been undercharging for 2 years? Were there any big changes in that regard?
Yeah, absolutely. So it was more that I was raising fees for new clients, which was the problem. I wasn't actually going back and raising fees for the existing clients, especially those who were taking up a significant amount of my time. So it was this odd mix of new people who were coming on and paying the more reasonable fees, and then the existing people who were still paying incredibly low fees. Another thing that I switched this year was that I stopped taking on as many projects. So I have a really bad problem. I cannot say no to people. And so I've gotten a lot better at it. Meg Bartelt has been fantastic at helping me to develop my no skills.
Good.
And so that was one thing I changed this year. So 2018, I did nearly $60,000 in just projects.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a lot of projects.
Nuts. And I also recognize the toll it took on my mental psychological health. And so, in the middle of this year, I made a conscious decision to stop doing that. And so that number dropped in half for 2019. And I basically have not taken on, I've taken on only a few projects since then, because I also really do see the value in doing the ongoing planning. And I'm trying to bring on clients who also see that value. So a lot of the projects I was doing, I was kind of in the back of my mind thinking these people do need more ongoing help, because the reality is they're not going to implement half of this stuff based on kind of what I can tell of their personalities, but I didn't want to push them. And so at this point, I'm more or less very selectively taking projects if I think it makes sense. And I'm really trying to push that value, convey like what the ongoing planning actually gets you, and helping people to kind of move in that direction. And so far, it's worked out pretty well. And my stress level has gone down significantly.
Oh, that's great. That's a very important thing to be tracking. And I'm interested in digging a little deeper into this project versus ongoing. And is it that that sounds great that prospects were finding you, they found you engaging, found you worthy of investing at least some money into getting up off their feet. I guess, what were the kind of projects you were working on, and why were they coming to you for project work? And what went into your unwillingness to really talk to them about comprehensive planning, if that was ultimately what you thought they needed? I suppose, how does that all work? I mean, were you advertising project-based work on your website at the time?
A lot of people were finding me on the NAPFA website. the FPA, CFP board. And so they see all of the things that say fee only. And a lot of people translate that to mean hourly. And so, especially with NAPFA, everyone I get from NAPFA is like, oh, you do hourly work. And I say, well, yes, in some regard, that's accurate. But then I'd kind of take it a step further and explain to them the difference between hourly versus project versus retainer to help them understand. But this was very new for a lot of those people. And so part of my willingness to take on the projects was I liked having the money in my bank account.
Yeah.
I liked collecting that upfront check and having that safety and that comfort of knowing they've paid me and then I'm going to be able to pay my bills for the month, quite frankly. It came back to my own money scripts and money issues, quite frankly. And so a lot of the plans were comprehensive plans. So we were doing soup to nuts. It just wasn't it didn't include any sort of implementation help. It didn't include monitoring and tracking, progress updates, really like holding their feet to the fire. There was no accountability or support there. And so a lot of the projects actually were more all-inclusive. I did do probably a handful of one-off, review this type thing. Oh, help me figure out this type of things. And that was okay. Again, I tried to use my discretion and my judgment to figure out when that made sense. And for the most part, part of what you want to look for is whether they are type A and whether they are self-sufficient, if they can and will actually implement what you're saying. And at that point, it was more or less, I kind of said, you know what, I didn't want to be like, I didn't want to push them if that wasn't what they wanted. It was more or less accepting their answer for face value instead of really digging deeper and finding out why they were thinking that or saying that. And so I think now I try to dig a little bit deeper. And so when someone says they want to just do a project, I actually try and get to the reason why, whether it's they don't know about the other options, whether it's they think they're going to do it themselves. And then I try and basically just give them an overview of what the ongoing planning is all about, what they get for it. And a lot of times they are actually more inclined to switch gears and say, oh, you know what, that actually sounds good. A lot of them say, let's try it for a year and see where to go from there. But my hope is that in that year, they see the value and it's worth moving forward, beyond that initial, year-long commitment.
Love it. Love it. So I guess talk to us a little bit about it. It sounds like now that you are debt free, what are you going to be doing with the revenue that that's coming into your firm, given that you've been, heavily really focusing on reducing that debt, which is so impressive. Now that you've got some cash in the bank that's not going away, what are you going to be doing both for yourself and for your business in the future with it?
So many things. All of the things. Yeah, 2020, I keep saying all this year, I just keep saying, okay, 2019, get on with it, because and everyone is also saying this, so I don't think I'm special, but I just have this gut feeling that 2020 is going to be a really good year. It has to be. It's an even year. It sounds good, 2020. My logic, it's great. So I've got a lot of things. I tend to be a little scatterbrained, so I'm trying to actually put a plan in place for all the things I want to tackle.
Yeah.
With my experience, growing up, how I've been with money, the whole thing with starting the firm, having the debt and all that, I've been doing a lot of internal work with my own money scripts, my own money issues, and the things that have kind of held me back or pushed me in a direction. And to that end, I've long been fascinated by the psychology behind money. And again, given my experiences, I compare, my brothers are very different. Like I said, I was the first person in my family to graduate from high school. By all intents and purposes, I'm relatively financially successful at this point in comparison. And so I've always kind of liked the idea of financial life planning and George Kinder and everything that he has, created and introduced to the profession. And so at this point, I'm finally in a position financially where I can pursue that. And so when XY Live for 2019 had George come do the 2-day conference, I could not sign up quicker. I was like, oh my God, the stars are aligning. This is happening. Yay. And so going to that was, not to be dramatic, but that was life-changing. Kind of seeing how that impacted, me. And so one thing, Scott Frank always says is you can't do life planning for other people until you've life planned yourself. And I totally understand what he means by that. And it makes sense. And I'll admit it, I cried like a baby after the first night of the Kinder Pre-Con because it was so powerful, in terms of my own, money story,
Wow.
money scripts, and history with money, and how I think about things, how I function around it, in the present, and what it's, stopping me from doing. And so after that experience, I said, I'm all in, I'm doing it.
Yay.
So yeah, it's really exciting. A bunch of us from the 2-day actually signed up for the January 5-day training, which will be in Hana, Hawaii. How terrible to spend, a week there learning all about
Right.
life planning.
Wow. I definitely want to join. I'm so interested in this life planning conversation because it's come up so often recently. I likely won't be going to Hawaii, but I know many members are. But tell us more about this and in terms of what made you emotional that night. What are some of the things and activities that Kinder puts you through to get you thinking about these things? And then ultimately, how does your service model change around it?
Yeah, that is a really great question. One that I've been having a lot of conversations with other planners in recent weeks and months to figure that out. The thing that George's process does is it really forces you to take stock of your life as it is right now. We all have a history, we all have a past that has kind of shaped and informed who we are and how we view money, our relationship with money now. And so actually confronting that, I think I tend to just, if I don't want to think about something, I just won't. You put it off to the side and you're like, oh, I don't know, I'll get to that when I get to it, kind of thing. And being in that room for 2 days and hearing all these stories and talking about all of these things, going through these exercises that he has you go through, if if you're familiar, the three questions, getting more intense, as you answer them, and ultimately, if you had, 24 hours, left to live, what would you wish you had done with your life? Who do you wish you would become? And that question it got me. And I said, if this is going to have this much of a profound impact on me, I can only imagine how, doing this with clients and helping them to really kind of unlock the life they want to live by helping them plan their lives financially around these objectives and goals. Money really is just a tool. It's a resource to help us do the things we want to do. I know it's powerful. And I know that given the opportunity, clients, I think would really get a lot out of the process and ideally live healthier, happier lives. And if I can be a part of that, then even better.
Yeah. Wow. How valuable to be able to work with clients on kind of defining what their vision is. Because once the vision's clear, I forget where I heard it recently, but once the vision's clear, the process is clear. And you can actually start understanding how to get there and achieve some of the goals that you're working through. How do you suspect the actual implementation changes for you? I guess compare and contrast what you're currently doing with your clients as they're onboarded to what you expect you'll be doing with your clients when they're onboarded.
Honestly, that's kind of a little bit of an unknown right now. And I keep posing this question to life planners who've been doing this for years and even, friends who are going through the process is, I think for the most part, the process has been used on an older type of client, right? Clients who are a little bit older in different life stages. And so I don't know how much knowledge, there is, or how much realistic, resources there are in terms of implementing this for younger demographics. I know there definitely are advisors who are doing this. So I think it's probably what I struggle with most is how to effectively implement it moving forward and what that actually looks like. And I'm hoping that going through the 5-day training in Hawaii will actually bring some clarity around that. A lot of I think there's 14 total people going. And I think the good majority of us target or work with a younger demographic. And so I think having all of that, brain power in one room and all of that knowledge and all of those thoughts and ideas will lead to a clearer path for planners who are using this on a younger type of client. And so I think I'm very fortunate in that, my client base is primarily split at this point between the LGBTQ community and then entertainment industry people and creative type folks. So that's kind of how off topic, how the firm is morphed into kind of a different type of client. But for the entertainment industry people and creatives that I work with, they kind of have a leg up because they're, for the most part, already pursuing their passion.
Right.
Right. Which also, on the other side of that, probably comes with a little bit of potential history and trauma around pursuing said passion. I think I even have friends who, I have one of my really good friends, she is an accountant and she hates it.
Mm.
But she was basically threatened when she went into college. She wanted to go into graphic design or the arts, and her parents basically said, no, you need to get a degree in business so you can make something of yourself, or we're not paying for it. And I
Ouch.
think, it's all too common for that. There's a lot of pressures. I met with a prospective client who's a lawyer, and he absolutely hates it. But he does it because he feels family pressure to take care of his family financially. He feels like he needs to make a lot of money because his parents, were immigrants, and he wants to take care of them. And so there's all these different outside pressures that are pointing us in a direction that maybe isn't our best fit. But for creative people, they're kind of more or less been able to skip over some of that and approach things a little bit differently. Not to say they're doing everything they want to do in life, but they're certainly in a different position than a lot of folks.
That's such a nuanced thought. I really never thought of that of working with creatives in this in your industry, you're right. They have done some of that. They're living a little bit more along the lines of what their talents are and what they want. What a beautiful way to be able to connect and compliment your clients on that move already. And the work that you'll do with them only continues to complement that and bring them further and closer to their more authentic self.
Right, exactly. And I think that's a little bit where I'm still trying to figure out how to incorporate the life planning into that, because it is a little bit of a different dynamic. And hopefully, like I said, I'll be able to gather some wisdom and thoughts and what have you from those around me to help kind of figure out what that looks like. And, like with anything, it's trial and error.
Right.
We'll try something, it doesn't work, switch it up. Try something, doesn't work, switch it up.
Absolutely. And I love this industry so much and working with our members so much, because I'm always so inspired with the type of continuing education that they're all doing, that you all as planners are really just kind of driven people to begin with. And not many of you that I speak with have stagnated. All of you are really reaching for what the next thing is for you and your clients and your firm, what the next growth opportunity can be. And I really commend all of you, and you specifically, for continuing to evaluate where you can add value and how you can continue to become yourself a more full and comprehensive advisor by becoming true to some of your money scripts and your familiarity and psychology with money. What other ways are you reinvesting in yourself?
So the other thing I decided to tackle is doing what started out as a brand refresh. So just kind of refreshing things, livening it up, getting a little bit more focused. I think as of last night has become a brand relaunch.
Oh, tell us about that.
I was walking down the streets in the rain in Brooklyn with my partner, and we were just talking, and I said, you know what? No, I'm going all in on this thing. I'm going to create the brand and the image that I wanted to from the start, but quite frankly, didn't have the financial ability to do. And so it was just kind of a moment, just walking down the street. And I said, this is what I want to do. I'm changing it up. So it happens that quickly. I'm sure everyone who's doing this has kind of had those moments of like, oh, wait, no, I'm going to do something completely different.
Yeah. So would you be willing to share what's kind of up your sleeve with it?
So when I started the firm, as I mentioned, I was in a decent amount of debt and did not have the funds to invest in myself or the firm, really. It was basically get up and running with bare bones and do what you can while you can. And so I actually built my website myself in 4 days out of desperation. You get really creative when you're desperate. And so far it's worked out really well. I do get a lot of really, really good feedback on it. And I think partially because it's definitely different than the typical, RIA website. And I think that's why people like it. And it's done well for me, but I think it definitely could stand to be, updated by a professional who will give it a little bit more of a professional ring, but, not overly corporate. And those were the explicit instructions I have been discussing with my web designer. I don't want a canned corporate looking website because I do work with creatives. I do work with people who are, a little bit more demanding of their aesthetic, I guess is the best way to put it. And so, I don't know exactly where that leads me to. I recently, I don't know what I was thinking, started an Instagram account for the business. I have not posted anything yet because, again, I don't know what I'm doing. So I'm actually coming up with an actual marketing plan. And so I guess this is all going to come together. And so I'm doing a couple of videos with a really amazing videographer friend of mine who does more like documentary style creative type films. So everything I do, because this is just who I am, I just want to be a little bit different than the typical. I like to just have a little bit of a different flair to things, maybe a little more artistic, if I dare say, without sounding like a weirdo.
No.
But so that's what's going on there. It's very much in its infancy. And we'll kind of just see how things go out. But unfortunately, that also delays my time frame. And so it'll probably take a couple of months to get that going. But I'm really excited to finally be able to see to the vision that I initially had, but didn't have the resources to implement.
I love it. And I think that, speaks to your intentionality and your resourcefulness early on, that, you knew you had a vision, but here's what you could do with what you had. And I must say your website has always been impressive. And I think it's really true to who you are, but I can't wait to see the new revamp. That being said, what are your plans for the next few years with your firm? Where do you want to go? Are you thinking about setting up a headquarters office in LA, or what exciting other things are you going to be adding to that you'll be tackling over the next few years?
Yeah, that's, I love and hate when people ask me that question because it's hard enough for me to think past next week. But, I definitely have a lot of thoughts. I do go back and forth with kind of how big I want to grow the business. Sometimes I want it to just be, what they've called the quote unquote lifestyle practice, to give myself more flexibility, which is a big reason why I started the firm, was to have that flexibility. But I also feel a certain sense of obligation to help usher in the next generation, but also to provide opportunities for those who don't have such easy access or such an easy path into the industry. And so that drives my desire to build it big enough to build a small team to kind of create, a potential job creation funnel of sorts. And so kind of like, it'd be like the way I envision it is some sort of like residency type thing. And I know those do exist out there, which is fantastic, but, it'd be focused on, bringing more diversity into the profession, more, I think as a white person, you have ample opportunity and what have you to get a job. And I think, people of color, other underrepresented communities, the LGBT folks, there's not as many opportunities there, especially if you are in, smaller cities or towns. Being able to offer jobs remotely is a huge thing, but I think also by bringing in those types of underrepresented communities, you're also creating more inroads into those clients, right? So typically speaking, so I know for a lot of LGBTQ folks, they prefer to work with an LGBTQ advisor. There's just that underlying comfort and understanding of like, you get me, we've kind of experienced the same things here. I mean, I think that's true for a lot of other communities. And so, communities of color who have maybe been distrustful of the financial system, if you can bridge the gap and provide a resource to them that they're more comfortable with working with, then you are creating, it's the domino effect, right? If you can instill that education, you can help them with their finances, they can then turn to their siblings, their community, their people, and pass on those little nuggets of wisdom to kind of have that domino effect to some extent of just creating more financial awareness and breaking some of the cycles that tend to exist. So there's that elements of things that I feel very passionate about, but also terrified about, because that creates an element of accountability and responsibility for growing a business that can sustain those types of activities. And so I definitely struggle with how to go about next steps. And that's probably why I don't think about it as often as I should, because it just gets overwhelming, to be completely honest.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm interested in your perspective, especially as a member of the LGBTQ community. Over the past decade that you've been in this industry, do you really feel like we're making progress?
I would love to say yes. And especially in this climate, it feels like we've actually regressed a little bit. Quite honestly, I To my own detriment, I've kept myself in a pretty isolated bubble, which is doing a disservice because I come from privilege. I grew up in LA. I had a fairly different experience growing up. I came out when I was 13, and so I'm acutely aware of how bad homophobia can be and how bad bullying can be and how unaccepting and whatnot that family, friends, communities can be of said things. I fortunately never experienced that. And so that is privilege right there. The fact that I am a white woman, that is privilege as well. And I have not done a great job of spending that privilege. I cannot remember who coined that term, but I love it. And so that is actually one of the things that I am looking to really start to come to terms with and figure out how I want to have a greater impact and use and spend my privilege moving forward. And so, that's to say, I have not been as aware and involved in those types of things. But from what I read, the people I talk to, it seems that a lot of the push for diversity and inclusion has been very much a surface level marketing ploy / tactic by companies to showboat around the things that they've done. And so on a surface level, perhaps one could say, yes, it looks like it's gotten better. In reality, I quite honestly don't think it has.
Yeah. Interesting. I really appreciate your perspective on that. And, like every industry, I think there's so much room for improvement. And I think, advisors like you who have been talking about and planning around the future of their firm on how to create pipelines of other advisors within this industry to enter it and be successful is exactly how we're going to continue to do it. So I appreciate your work on that. And I think you're quite humble when you talk about your experience and what you've been through. Tell us a little bit about what keeps you up at night when it comes to running your firm and the environment that we have in this industry. Is anything weighing heavily right now on you?
That's a fun question. I'm an anxious person by nature. So I have generalized anxiety disorder, panic disorder. So it's safe to say that pretty much everything keeps me up at night. As a business owner, I think my inability to recognize my limits and outsource when necessary probably is the worst thing. I know I don't need to do everything, but I want to do everything. And I end up spreading myself too thin, which then creates a ton of worry, especially at night, because that's when I just lay in bed with my eyes completely wide open going, oh my God, I have all of these things and I didn't do XYZ thing or I didn't do this thing. And so probably that, recognizing my limits. Opportunity cost is a real thing, and it's something that I need to get comfortable with looking into.
Yeah, I love that opportunity cost. And I think, I think this episode is really going to resonate with a lot of folks because I think a lot of us do deal with our own internal struggles and anxiety. And it's so nice to hear a success story of someone who's gotten through that despite having, the kind of just the mental anguish that folks with generalized anxiety go through. And I understand it and I'm familiar with it. Do you have any advice for folks that might be listening to this episode and considering either entering in the industry or going out on their own about doing it?
Oof. I have strong opinions about, real world experience, getting real world experience before launching on your own. I think, is it possible for someone to walk right out of the CFP program and start their own firm and probably do a reasonably decent job of providing financial planning? Sure. But I think there are so many skills that you don't develop as quickly that could really come in handy as you start your own firm. And so I think the idea of getting experience is really important. But at the same time, recognizing that opportunities, especially at fee-only firms, are few and far between. And that's part of the problem, right? It's get experience, but where? And so sometimes, sometimes people reach out and they'll ask me, I've got this opportunity. I could go to, so-and-so wirehouse or this broker dealer, and they'll put me through the training program. Do you think I should do that kind of thing? And sometimes that may be worth it to develop those skills. That doesn't mean you have to stay there forever. And hopefully that culture doesn't eat you alive and induct you into their cult. And so, it might be helpful to do those things, to develop those skills if you don't already have them, and if it's something that you could brush up on and use that to kind of transition. Because I know a lot of firms say, oh, 1 to 3 years of experience. Well, where do you get those 1 to 3 years of experience? More or less, those bigger firms are usually more inclined to hire straight out the gate and not have those expectations. But it's definitely going to be a different environment. I was very fortunate in that I was able to go directly into a fee-only small firm, and I recognize that not everyone can do that. But I think having some experience ahead of time before you start is really great. And then, knowing your why you're doing it is really important, other than to make money, which obviously we all want to do to some extent. And talk to as many people as possible. Get as many different opinions and thoughts and ideas. Collect as much information as you can to help you make a decision, of course, without overloading yourself and, your brain exploding.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd love to slowly or quickly running out of time, but I do have another question just about how has the community that you've surrounded yourself around been of service to you during these years that you've built Equalis? Is the community that you've built something you lean into often? Do you have mentors and coaches and study groups that you reach out to? Or I guess talk to us a bit about the people you've surrounded yourself around.
Yeah, it took me a little bit of time to get comfortable with the idea of creating a community within like the financial advisor community. I didn't have a lot of community growing up. It wasn't something that I knew how to build or join or exist in. I was somewhat of not a loner. I definitely had friends, but like I definitely kind of kept myself. I've always been very introverted, so I have a hard time, approaching people and feeling comfortable in those types of settings. And so it took me a while, quite frankly, to start to build community and tap into the people and resources who had made themselves available to me. And at this point, I do have a study group, and I'm a member of a couple of networking, like really cool networking groups and what have you, where I'm starting to build and form these relationships, but also, practicing skills, right? Talking to people, getting out there. I have met some incredible people through XY. And one that I will mention specifically is Brian Thompson. And he has just been an absolute ray of sunshine in my life. He and I were in a study group, God, I think it was in 2017 in XY. And then we met in person for the first time at XY Live 2018. And he and I have actually established and built a really fantastic friendship outside of this. But, he encouraged me to be more open and vulnerable in sharing my story. And I can't tell you how freeing and amazing that has been, to number one, to have him in my life, to have him encouraging me and what have you, but to share my story and kind of see not only how that impacts me, my ability to share it and what it's done for me, but also hoping that it, is helping others in some small way. I think a lot of us are trained or encouraged to always put on a brave face, but that doesn't help us grow. And it quite frankly, it creates an unhealthy relationship with success and perfection, which is really, really dangerous. If all you're ever hearing is the positive and what worked, it creates this illusion that there was no struggle and everything happened just seamlessly. And that's not real. That's not real life. And so the issue is when we inevitably fail or take a misstep, we're overly harsh on ourselves. We beat ourselves up and think we're the only one who's made this horrible mistake, and it sets unrealistic expectations of the process. And I think by adding vulnerability into conversations and admitting, hey, I was 50 grand in credit card debt. Hey, I grew up poor. Hey, here are the things that were really, messed up in my life. It's helping people know that they're human, right? And I think the community I'm building it revolves around that element of vulnerability and openness and honesty, and really creating these authentic relationships with people to help drive each other and encourage each other to be better humans. And after all, that's really what we're all doing in one way or another. Anything we do is to drive people to be better people, live healthier, happier lives.
Beautiful. Well said. And I must say, both you and Brian have been a personal impact on me, and I know the rest of the XYPN community. It's been a total honor and pleasure to work with both of you, and specifically you today, talking through some of these highs and lows of your career and your experience coming into this industry and remaining in it. I can't thank you enough for being transparent and honest today and allowing the listeners to hear that and potentially sharing it themselves. With that, Leighann, thank you so much.
Thanks, Maddie. Really, really had a great time.
Absolutely. Bye-bye.
XY Planning Network's annual benchmarking survey is out. Are you curious about the average number of clients XYPN members get in their first year, or how successful niches really are? To answer these burning questions and more, we've again enlisted a professional research firm to complete our annual benchmarking study. Get your copy hot off the press and discover vital statistics such as the median advisor revenue by years in practice and sources of firm growth, from referrals to blogging, social media, and more. Head over to xyplanningnetwork.com/study to purchase your copy today.
Be sure to join our VIP community at xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP to hang out with other XYPN radio listeners, ask questions for future mailbag episodes with Alan and Kitsis, and finally to find a community of like-minded financial advisors. Thanks so much for joining me today. We'll see you next time.
You're not alone, and you're not crazy. It's scary starting, building, and growing your own financial planning firm. And that's why we put together a free private community just for you, the Cutting Edge Financial Planner. Go to xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP or text XYPN Radio to 33344 and join a network of thousands ready to change the lives of Gen X and Gen Y clients.